This is by far the best comic I've ever read. You guys are practically holding me hostage with this Rook Exodus story, immediately demanding that I drop the next part right after uploading the previous. But honestly, I don't even really mind because the story still continues to get even better with each new issue somehow. So without further ado, Rook Exodus Attention Span Test Part 3. Now the last part ended off with Rook and Dire Wolf fleeing New Mason after Ersa the Bear Man destroyed Rook's rocket and attempted to kill them. But this issue picks up with Rook and Dire Wolf arriving to a boardwalk that Rook used to like visiting back when Exodus was thriving. But now that it was completely abandoned, the only useful thing about it was that it had a boat there. And the reason Donica and Rook needed a boat in the first place was because it was the quickest option to get them to the Oasis. And the Oasis was a hub for survivors where they housed the wildlife grid. Now, alongside the world engine, the wildlife grid is the most powerful piece of tech ever created, functioning as a mass broadcasting orb responsible for connecting their helmets to the animals and also allowing them to contact other wardens. But going back over to Donica and Rook, soon enough Donica began explaining that in order for them to establish universal contact between the other wardens, they'd have to perform something referred to as triangulation, which was only possible with 3 separate warden helmets. So Rook assumed that they'd be meeting her father there, but after taking her helmet off, Donica expressed that he'd already been killed by Ersa, and then told the leader of her wolf pack, Freya, to watch over the others and that they should be back soon. Upon making the discovery about her father, Rook began to apologize because he was completely unaware. But right after that, he suggested that she put her helmet back on, indicating that her pack looked at her as a male when she wasn't wearing it. Positive that he was completely wrong though, Donica then stressed that yes, the mask allows you to establish the initial connection, but once it was established, the helmet could become secondary. So if you trust them, they'll trust you. And she should know because she was actually Better World's first ever warden. In the middle of their journey on the water, Rook noted his desire to ask Donica more questions about her father, but apparently she refused to talk about it, so he avoided bringing it up and informed her that there wasn't any food on the boat at all. Moments later, he noticed one of his birds flying down to the water to scoop up a fish, and that's when he stated that the birds knew when he was hungry and would purposely find food and eat it in front of him to antagonize him. Donica believed that that was total BS though, telling him that he needed a better relationship with his animals. Eventually they successfully made it to the Oasis where they were addressed by the warden of the turtles named Carpus. And I just want to say hats off to the artist Jason Fabuk because he went so disgustingly hard with every single character design. But anyways, Carpus is actually 118 years old under his helmet, and the rumor was that he was still alive back when Earth still had a chance of being saved from pollution and division. And while staring both of them down, Rook questioned Donica if she was actually friends with him because soon enough 2 giant turtles emerged from the water who were both equipped with massive arsenals and aiming them in their direction. But according to Donica, they weren't aimed at her. They were aimed at Rook because Carpus didn't really care for him, and we'll get to why in a moment. Regardless of his feelings though, Carpus eventually led him inside where Rook began thinking about how he'd never actually met Carpus before and a lot of the other wardens as well, because back in his training his squad was small, consisting of him, Swine, Jackrabbit, and a few others. Nevertheless, he admitted how impressive what Carpus had accomplished here was, but it was definitely clear that being connected to the turtles for so long had an effect on him because he walked and talked so slowly. He didn't say a word to them for a long time until asking Dire Wolf where Swine was. Rook would then answer for her, telling him that Swine was dead now thanks to Ersa. After confirming who Rook was, Carpus expressed that he was disappointed, not because Rook couldn't be trusted, but because he couldn't be relied upon, stating that he would listen to all the wardens using the wildlife grid and knew that Rook had built a rocket to abandon Exodus the same way Better World did. So basically Carpus doesn't like Rook because they were nothing alike. Rook wanted to abandon Exodus while he was the type to fight for it, and in fact he had already fought for it in the past because when Better World was leaving Exodus they actually wanted to take the wildlife grid with them, but because him and other wardens like Donica's father Bloodhound fought for it, they still had it. To try and prove that he could be counted on, Rook then pointed out that Ersa destroyed his rocket and killed his friend, but it kinda ended up backfiring with Carpus calling him selfish for only doing this seeking revenge. Nevertheless, Donica eventually calmed the tension, saying that she was doing this for all of Exodus and urging them to plug into the wildlife grid. Before proceeding though, Carpus warned her, stating that many of the wardens were quiet, many were likely already dead, and most of the ones still alive would reject their call because just like like Rook, they believed Exodus was past saving. Our comic then takes us on a detour into the woods where a buck began to run for its life because of the Ark. And besides looking like the coolest thing I've ever seen, the Ark is actually the mobile fortress of Ersa, filled to the brim with weaponized vehicles and an arsenal like no other. And while Ersa stood inside looking at the other helmets he'd stolen, he was approached by one of his men, telling him that he was ready for one of the helms. But completely disregarding his request, Ersa told him to be quiet because he could hear them. We're then brought back over to Rook, Donica, and Carpus plugging themselves into the wildlife grid, with Rook questioning whether this was safe while sweating profusely. Now, before we proceed, I must warn you that you are about to witness an overload of awesome, amazing coolness, because upon establishing the connection, Rook stated that the world felt like it was sucked away by a vacuum as everything went quiet and he began to hear them. All of the other wardens across the planet, and there are so freaking many and they are so freaking cool, and I'm honestly gonna go over every single one of them. So first we have Raynor the Fox, Warden of the Foxes, and honestly he's looking like a Robin Hood type of character, which is sick. Then we have Arachne or Arachne, however you pronounce it, who's obviously the Warden of the Spiders. There's Hardhead, none other than the Warden of the Rams, and then you have this guy Stag, a Warden of the Deers, and I think he has to be my favorite. Bro looks like a straight up Sith samurai with his color scheme. And as Rook listens in on them, he starts to feel as if he's not alone, which is probably really good for him and making him realize that Exodus is worth fighting for. But after that we have Matterhorn, Warden of the Goats, and I want to point out that in Matterhorn's preview, one of her followers says, "We need to go, Apex is coming." So there's probably another villain like Ersa out there who controls the apes, and that sounds absolutely amazing and also terrifying. Nevertheless, as we move forward, we have the Locust, who obviously controls the locusts, and then the Buffalo, which is also self-explanatory, Jackrabbit the Hare, and this one, Glacier the Polar Bear, is probably their best bet at combating Ersa. Now you also have a Master Splinter looking one named Vermin, and as I show you each of them, you can actually see their responses as they realize Rook and the others are connecting to them. So Cockrell tells them that he'll kill them if they don't stay away from his chickens. Kida the Mountain Lion just wants to be left alone, and then we realize that Ersa has been listening in on them the entire time, telling Rook that he sees his birds in the sky, and that's when Rook is overwhelmed, repeatedly telling them to shut it off immediately. And after taking his helmet off, Donica asks him what he's doing, to which Rook responded, "Ersa is here." And this time he wasn't alone, being accompanied by the new Warden of the Boars, Warhog, and also the Warden of the Pythons, Ka. But sadly that's when this issue comes to an end, but if you want to see what happens next, let me know in the comments down below.